As ever with these events, ladies and gentlemen, time is always against us, so we're going to press on immediately. And our next guest needs little introduction, as he is arguably as famous as the Hollywood stars that appear in his TV ads. But before we welcome Britain's most famous baker to the stage, let's take a look at him playing alongside Samuel L. Jackson in one of his best roles to date.
Mr. Warburton is... Sorry.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Warburton, chairman of the UK's largest family bakery. Now, I'm a good guy, family man. But sometimes Johnny Lovely Crumpets won't cut it. Sometimes you need Samuel L. Jackson to play you in a commercial, because when I see this from Steve up in my socials, it unleashes a furious anger in me. Jonathan, I love your toasty loaf, but I've seen other toasty loaves in the shops that look exactly the same. What gives? What gives? What gives, Tweety Pie, is me, Jonathan Warburton. I give. And hell had no fury like a baker scorned, Steve. You see, the righteous baker suffers the slings and arrows of temptation at every turn. Sure, we could pack our toasty loaf full of so much run-of-the-mill wheat it'd make your mama cry, but would we? Hell no.
Who was that?
Jonathan Warburton?
We pack it full of our unique blend of wheat and 147 years of baking passion! Like my father, his father, his father, and his mother. We get up hella early, and we stay up hella late.
Thanks, Wuss.
We test for softness, butterability, and bounce back ability. Yeah, that's a thing. And only once our doughyologists have 3D scanned, stamped, and approved it, do we wrap it up in a pretty wax paper package just for you. So you go ahead and grab yourself some wannabe Warburton's toasty loaf, Steve, because they all taste the same, right? Right? See, this is the real Jonathan Warburton, and this here is the real Warburton's toasty loaf. Something like that, J-Dubs?
I couldn't have said it better myself.
How do you follow that, right? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jonathan Warburton, Chairman of Warburtons, and Suzanne Costello, Events Director at the Advertising Association. Welcome both.
Thank you, Kamal. And welcome,
Follow that.
Jonathan. I know. It's fantastic to have you here. Thank you
Thank you.
for taking the time to join us. Now, I'm sure there's not a single person in this audience who isn't familiar with Warburtons, but you might not be aware of its remarkable history. The business was started by Jonathan's great uncle and aunt in a tiny grocery shop in Bolton in 1876 with just 4 loaves of bread and 6 cakes. Fast forward, and Warburtons is now the UK's largest bakery brand, producing over 2 million products every single day. And what truly sets it apart is it's still an entirely family-run business, and it's still headquartered in Bolton. Now, Jonathan, you joined the business aged 23, not that long ago, and were appointed marketing director in the late 80s. At that time, Warburtons was still a regional bakery, and you were tasked with making it a household name outside the Northwest, so not a small undertaking. Can you take us back to that time and talk us through a little bit about the marketing strategy you inherited and how you went about evolving it?
Firstly, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Listening to Ian, I thought that was great. Some great stuff in there. Really interesting. A bit depressing. I'll try and lighten it up. Not you, Ian, the content. But it is a treat to be here. I mean, you know, I've worked in our family business forever. I joined not long after. I was a sales rep for Unilever and then joined in my early 20s. I've been living in bed and breakfast for about 3 years all over the country, and I decided I got the chance. We were just as a little local business in Bolton, where we were within, for those of you old enough to remember where the Granada TV region used to be, we were basically within Granada TV. And we had a marketing director. We had a marketing department of one, so he made himself marketing director. We were just starting to deal with the major supermarkets. So I got this opportunity to come back because I got some experience because I've been working for Unilever as a sales rep, as I said. I got the opportunity to come back to the business. And to be honest with you, I was sick to bloody death of living in bed and breakfast. So I jumped at the chance. And then we decided, it was just as we were beginning to transition from generation to generation. My dad had worked in the business from the mid-50s and then took over with his two brothers and his cousin in the 60s. And they, he wanted to go and play golf. So we were in that position of transition, which is funny enough where we are now with our own family. And we had a very diverse business. I mean, just one of the themes of what's made Warburtons have a bit of success is that we've just set out to be the best in the world at one thing. Now, if I'd have heard myself saying those words even a decade ago, I'd have thought I got well above my station. I'd have thought, best in the world, don't be bloody daft. But in fact, now I've come to the conclusion that it's actually the only noble strategy that one can have. Whatever your role is, whatever your job is, if you don't want to be better than anybody else, then why bother turning up in the first place? So we've sort of adapted that mantra. At the time, my predecessor was, for you in the industry will laugh at this, he was writing his own TV commercials. And I came in and thought, hang on a minute, this is bonkers. And you've got to remember, I was a 25-year-old single lad from Bolton. All right, I've been away at boarding school and all that. I worked away. I was a single lad in Bolton. And I thought, would an advertising agency bake its own bread, or would it go to a baker? Well, of course, it would go to a baker. So what on earth are we doing messing around doing that? Also, being a single guy, I had a colleague in the business who was one of my dad's generation, who was a professor before he joined us at university professor, and he was great. And he introduced me to the advertising agency, whatever your governing body, probably what you are, the association. So I went down to see them, and they said, right, here are three startup agencies that we think you should get in touch with, because we think they might serve your needs. So you got to remember, this is 40 years ago, thick end of 40 years ago. So I dutifully wrote them all a letter. Only one of them responded. And I tell you, you would know what this lot did from their name and name alone. So they weren't called, Smith Incorporated. They were called Still, Price, Court, Twivy and D'Souza. So you immediately knew it was an ad agency came back. So the only one, so I went to see Chris Still, and we had a very, very productive 10 years. The whole history of our business was built on the back of product quality. My family have been obsessed with trying to make the highest quality, everyday mass market product for generations. We're not trying to be the £6 sourdough. And we don't do any private label for any retailers. It's a purely branded business. Actually, interesting stat, it's the most bought product in Britain, Warby's bread, which is something that's happened by default, not by design. Anyway, Dad had built a reputation. We use about 50% of all the wheat that we use is from Canada. Canadian wheat's the best in the world, and then the rest is blended with UK wheat. And we pay a significant premium for Canadian wheat, and we go onto the prairies, and I can take you to a field and tell you which proportion of the field has our wheat in it and which doesn't. So I think, stay awake with me. I know it's not a bit dull. I think this is a really interesting story. So I go and see Mike Court, who was the creative director, and I tell Mike this, and he turned around to me after a while and he said, "That is probably the dullest story I've ever heard." And honestly, I was crestfallen. He said, the only thing that's interesting about you guys is you're still a family business. And that's how all this started. And the first ad that we made, and just to get my reference pointing, because you could imagine making those kind of ads costs a few quid. The first ads we made 3 ads for 20 grand. The first one featured my mother and father, and I persuaded my mum and dad to do it. Now, at the time, there were 2 other people in Britain advertising their own businesses. One was a guy called Bernard Matthews, who had the Bootiful turkey business, and the other was a chap called Victor Khayyam. And Victor liked his Remington razors so much he bought the business. And I went home to my mum and dad and said, look, I've got this great idea. So I thought, they'll help little Johnny out because he needs all the help he can get. I've got a great idea. I'd like you to be in the ad. And my mother and father, bless them, said, we'll only be in it if we are laughed with, not at. And so the first ad produced was my mother baking a loaf of bread, which she burnt to a cinder. And the line was, and Mrs. Joyce Warburton, who's only a Warburton by marriage, and in walked my dad with this perfect loaf. The really interesting thing about that was that the loaf that we showed on the ad, we didn't actually sell, which was quite a brave thing to do. And I think trying to be, we take a lot of responsibility because we don't make advertising that it's got to cut through. It's got to be. We've got to try and be famous. These are quite well received. Well, incredibly well. This was incredibly well received. But you're sticking your neck out to do it. You guys know how much ordinary stuff is out there at the moment. So we've tried to develop the business. I'm answering about 5 questions now. I know that. But the whole point about it was that we had a bit of success. We built on it. But the fundamentals was that we try and do things that are top class. And we say our bread's as important to us as our advertising is. So that's where it all really started. And, and we're just in the process now of trying to think, what the hell do we do next?
And it's a fantastic story. So it really was a pivotal moment, wasn't it, having your parents star in that first ad?
Yeah.
Catapulted into a new era of advertising, really. And of course, it paved. Perhaps it paved the way for you to go on to star in.
Well, you're very kind.
That's the way one would.
Yeah, I mean, we when we changed tack, and the first one of this latest thing was when we used Stallone.
That was another pivotal moment I was going to.
Yeah, I think
bring
that
up,
was
2015.
Yeah, that was
deliverables.
Yeah, so 10 years ago, I got a letter from a shopkeeper in Braemar in the Highlands, and it was in the winter of 2010 or 11. We had a couple of very bad winters, and I used to get letters. I now get emails, not all of them complimentary, but I do get it. I got a letter from a shopkeeper, and Braemar had been cut off for a week, and she said, I thought you ought to know the only company that's managed to get through was you, and we're very grateful for doing it. So I went to the agency. We'd moved then we'd moved many times, but we'd ended up with the then agency and said, look, there must be an idea in here for an ad. And that iterated itself. So the idea was, I'm thinking, because I'm paying for this, that actually if the ad, we'll use one of our own van salesmen in this ad. Because that's where my head was at the time. And we kind of went, look, if any of you have been the other side of the camera, even for the 30 seconds you're in, it's a lot harder than you think. They said, well, look, your guys are rubbish. You can't use anybody. So, well, who should we use? And I can remember we got as far in the negotiation, when we were chatting, we got as far as Jason Statham as a potential, because at the time the transporter movies were doing very well. I remember going home, and my wife at the time would have been in her mid-50s, and my daughter would have been in her early 20s. and I've got 3 sons. And I remember saying to Charlotte, my daughter, and Kim, we're thinking of using Jason Statham. To which my wife went, who's he? And my daughter went, yeah, can I come to the shoot? So I remember thinking, well, if Kim doesn't know who she is, we've got to appeal to most of the people most of the time. And
Who's better? Who better?
we went, and this is, anybody in this room in PR? None of you will admit it. Oh, well done. Well done. So we went back to our PR guy, who has become a personal friend of mine. And he said, no, you've not been ambitious enough. You've got to be a bit more punchy. What about Sylvester Stallone? Now, back me up on this. If a PR guy says he knows Sylvester Stallone, what that means is he stood next to him in a urinal. And to be fair to him, he did know a guy called, this guy who was involved in Planet Hollywood, whose name escapes me now. He knew him very well, and he was very friendly with Stallone, and that's how it started. So having thought for 1 minute, and he was brilliant. He was exactly how you hope somebody like that would be. Very down to earth, and him and I got on all right, and the rest is history, as they say.
Exactly, and then he was just the start, wasn't he?
He was.
Of course, we had George Clooney, Robert De Niro, we just saw Samuel L. Jackson, even Kermit the Frog made an appearance. Out of all of these incredible stars, who have you enjoyed working with the most?
Well, I can tell you it was the least enjoyable. That was De Niro. It was just
Was he
bloody
exactly how you'd
miserable.
expect?
He was just miserable. He was fantastic when the cameras were rolling. He really was. He was just like bang on it. But he actually was no fun. Whereas Sam Jackson was delightful, just as you would hope he would be. Stallone was great. But these people are so used to not, they don't know how to ask you a question because they're so used to people making a fuss of them. So if you spend a bit of time with them and you got chatting, they're okay, but they take a bit of warming up. Probably the most interesting was when we did the Muppet ad, because I actually went to Hollywood to do that, which, pardon me, rather than a warehouse in Brent Cross, which is where I did that one. But that was fascinating because that was such a big deal. I've never been to Hollywood, certainly never been in a stretch limo before. But it's been a great experience. But I do it because the response is fantastic. I never get recognised. I don't get bothered or anything like that. As I said, I get a bit of abusive emails and social media stuff, but I don't do any social media, so it kind of washes over me.
For sure. Well, you're now the biggest bakery business in the UK, making 800 million products every year with a turnover around 550 to 600 million pounds.
700.
700. It's gone up since the last.
Inflation.
Amazing. Would you say that advertising? How much do you say that advertising has contributed to that success? You'd hope a decent amount, considering the amount you've.
Well, the amount of money we've invested in it. Well, this audience knows better than me. You make a crap ad and throw tons of money at it, and it won't work, or a brilliant ad and not spend a lot, and it can work. Our first ad was fantastic, unbelievably simple and very cheap to make. There is some very, very high spending, very average advertising, because their people are so safe. They're just trying not to upset anybody, and you'll end up with what you're going to get. I'm afraid would be my view. I think it's been really. I can't put a number on it. It has an effect in lots of ways, though. Not only in the volume that people sell, but it's in how the retailers react to us. I'm going in. It doesn't necessarily be me, but Marianne, our managing director, who's really customer facing, and Colin, our sales director, they will go in on the back of an ad, and the audience. If I go and see the chief executive of Tesco, his almost first question: who's next? So there's that currency it gives you, but also we employ 5,000 people, and in the last 4 weeks I've been in Bognor, Basingstoke, Newton Abbot, and I was in Glasgow yesterday. Every time I do a Q&A with the workforce, which is what I do, second or third question is. So you've got to remember that they're proud to be involved in a business that uses advertising to promote itself in a way that most of the people, most of the time, seem to really enjoy. So there is that double. Yes, it's got to be good, but it's the internal and immediate external audience as well as the consumer. So it's a broad thing. And does it mean, is it important to people within our organisation to be associated with a company that's proud of itself? I think it's hugely important.
Absolutely. Well, one of our key work streams is rebuilding public trust in advertising. And recent research by industry think tank Kratos found that the number one driver of trust is enjoyment or entertainment. And how important is it the public view you as a trusted brand? I mean, they clearly do.
Massive. So when I grew up, and most of us in this room would probably hold Cadbury's as one of your favourite brands. And then you'd have people like Walker's, and you'd have, let me think off the top of my head, Coke, and I could go on. All of them are American. You know, Cadbury's is owned by Mondelez. Coke's obviously Coke. None of them are British. We're the fifth biggest brand in the country. We're the only British owned, and we're the only family owned. And we do 99% of all our volume in Britain. And one of my ambitions would be to make Warburtons a household name, but in a positive way. You know, we're not trying to be, we're unashamedly 80% mass market, high quality, incredibly good value for money brand. And if we stray out of there, we'll fall foul. An easy business in a similar position, I would say, will be Greggs. I mean, we haven't gone into merchandise. I can't believe you can go and buy a Greggs sweatshirt from Primark, but if Primark wasn't owned by one of my competitors, maybe I'd be knocking on his door. But you know, when we do things, it's bizarre. We do merch at Christmas. We do daft things like crumpet slippers and
I've seen those.
Honestly, we ought to really have a commercial department, because the amount of people we get trying to buy crumpet slippers, which is, by the way, two halves of crumpet. So when you sit with your feet like that, it's round.
Should have worn some today.
I should really.
Warburtons has weathered a few storms over recent years, namely COVID and the cost of living crisis. What are the biggest threats facing your business now, and how are you navigating them?
Complacency. Which I know isn't in the answer that you probably were given. But no,
I haven't been given an answer.
The thing that would worry me most about any business is you are at your most vulnerable when you're at your most successful. And we're having a really good run at the moment. And you see it in politics, that people you see it in business, that people think, oh, well, we're doing quite well now, aren't we? We're really quite clever. And they just take their eye off the ball, and that's when you're at your most vulnerable. So anybody in the organisation, if I'm asked that question, which I am quite regularly, it is complacency. I think we have to keep innovating. So without getting boring about this, our two main competitors that you would have known, would be Hovis and Kingsmill. When I grew up, they were called Mother's Pride and Sunblessed. When I started, Mother's Pride and Sunblessed market share in Britain combined would have been over 60%. We were 1% at the same time. Mother's Pride has morphed into Hovis, and Sunblessed has morphed into Kingsmill. Their combined market share as of last month, and it'll have gone down because I'll see the numbers on Tuesday, was 8.9%. Combined market share of 8.9%. 90, in excess of 90, in Kingsmill's case, 95%. In Hovis's case, probably 98% of what they make is a sliced loaf that comes out of a tin. We would be 50% sliced bread, 50% bagels, pancakes, the well-loved crumpets, thins, you name it. We've spent 150 million on new kit in the last 5-6 years. and you've got to, you have a responsibility to innovate yourself out of existence. And that goes for any industry. You talked about AI and touched on AI. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think there's a lot to find out, but you've got to try and keep ahead of it, because if you don't, somebody will come up on the rails and overtake you. And that's what we've done to our competitors. So I'm paranoid, hence the complacency point, about somebody doing it to us. And I suspect if I was sat here in 5 years' time in the same conversation, our share, interesting enough, our bread sales are incredibly strong at the moment, but share of sliced bread in the market will be well below 50%. We're about to launch waffles. Waffles, God, foreign stuff. I tell you, they're fantastic. They're so calorie, but they're good.
Absolutely delicious. And at one point you were looking into the luxury cake market as well?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We have, so my great aunt that started the business called Ellie. We have a tiny little fledgling business called Ellie Warburtons. Because we didn't have the manufacturer, it actually did better than we thought it would. And they were quite a market everyday cakes. They're going to come back in the autumn. We just didn't have the manufacturing facility. And I think the market's open. Kipling's a shop brand, it's another Hovis Premier Foods brand. It's doing better now. Ironically, it does really well in Australia, of all places. But I think that sector we would have an opportunity. But you've got to make decisions about where you're spending capital. So we're but it will come back in the probably this side of Christmas, all being well.
One to look out for. Just talk a little bit about the foundation you set up. You set up the Warburtons Foundation in 2022 to group together all your community activities that support families who are facing challenges. One of which is being your Ask for Ellen partnership with Morrison's, which provides free food for families over the school holidays. Do you feel a responsibility to give back to communities?
I mean, look, if you've run a family business for 148 years, if you don't do your bit for community, then you'll get found out. We're not doing it. We're doing it because it's just a normal thing to do, as far as I'm concerned. It's become 2022 as a formal. How we previously did it is that our bakeries used to have general managers. They now have site leads because we changed the structure. So GMs would be given a pot of money that they could go and spend on local activities. So you'd write in and go, dear Mr. Palmer, Chris Palmer used to be the GM at Nottingham. I've got a local lollipop lady's been taken off. Is there any chance of sponsoring you? It's 800 quid. And so they would then be able to make decisions about local stuff. And we still do that. It's just come under a more formal umbrella as we're now a much bigger business. But no, I think it's a sort of default setting for a family business that you've got to look after people as best you can. Food waste is another one. Try and get food waste out of the system. For years and years and years, the pig man would turn up at the loading bay for all the waste bread. We don't do sale or return. So once the retailers have bought it, they don't actually pay for it for a while. But once they've bought it, it's kind of theirs. They're not going to give it us back. But everything we can goes into company shop, free shop. All these places set up. But we do what we can. We do what we can. But local is really important, because I think it binds you in when you've got, we've 11 bakeries throughout the UK, so it binds them into the local. All the distribution depots, of which we've another 14 spread throughout the country. But we don't make it. The Ask for Ellen thing is something that's quite unique. It's not something we make a lot of noise about, because I just think it's what you should do.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we're actually running over a little bit.
Oh, what a surprise.
I would still like to give the audience an opportunity to ask you a question or two. While they're thinking of a question, I have one for you, because I'm dying to know. You've worked with some amazing stars. I would love to know who else is on your wish list. And if you can't think of one, I've got a suggestion.
Well, I'm not going to tell you, who we've got on. The interesting challenge is that I have for some time really wanted a woman to be in the advertising, and preferably a Brit.
Oh, I've got a great suggestion.
But the fascinating thing is that with somebody who'd like a female and a Brit, so you acid tested. So you ask the women in the audience, who should we have? Yeah, and you just got it's such a depressing list. I actually agree. I think you're on something there. You know, look, don't get me wrong, they're wonderful people. But Judi Dench?
Oh,
She's doing that car money supermarket.
It's true.
That's her. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. Scarlett Johansson. Now, Mrs. Warburton says, under no... No, I'm joking. I'm not. Scarlett Johansson ain't going to do it. I just, it's just an old fella wishing. It's really difficult because you answered the question perfectly. There's about 20 people shout out Dawn French, Judi Dench, Emma Thompson, who, by the way, is a spit of my wife, such and such a body. And whereas you ask the blokes, and I'll tell you what, the pool would be much, much smaller because we look at it through a different prism. It's actually much easier to get, I don't know why this is, but it's much easier to get ladies to choose a man than it is to choose a woman. You know, Brad Pitt would usually feature quite highly up the list. We don't really have any, but well, we've got a couple of people in mind. I'm not going to tell you who it is. We might change tack completely.
Oh.
We have our 150th anniversary coming up.
That's true.
So we've got to be, that's also in the thinking process. But, I mean, it tends to be, we've had this reaction when the ads have gone out, that they've got, I can't believe they've got. You do run out of road. Where do you go? I mean, there are certain people who will not do it. It's funny enough that most of them will when you say, well, I'll do it for X. Oh, okay, fine. But no, there will be people. So we are in a bit of flux at the moment, just deciding. We haven't got anything made or anybody we're even talking to.
Well, I think we are practically out of time, so unfortunately the audience don't have the opportunity to ask a question, but I will ask you one closing question. What's the one piece of advice you would give to a brand starting out today?
If you haven't got, whatever it is you do, if the quality of what you offer is not unique in its own way, then by default, you're just like everybody else. And I think you have to be able to, great brands, the harder you scratch, the more you find out about them. And one thing about our business that we've been able to utilize is the depth underneath it. I'm real. I've got my twin boys, Harry and Jack. One's been in a year, one's been in 2 weeks. They're 31 years old. Harry spent 7-8 years working in advertising, so he knows the industry. But the whole way we do things, by the colour of the vehicle is a unique colour. By the, our bakeries, the fact we're the only company in the world that grows this particular wheat in Canada. If you're not offering uniqueness, then by default it becomes a price argument. So I would say, whatever you're offering, uniqueness in a positive way is something to strive for.
Excellent advice, thank you. Well, that is all we have time for, but just before we go, we do have one more ad to play us out. Now, when I was setting up this interview, I asked your press officer what your favourite Warburtons ad is, and I was delighted to find out we share the same one.
Well done.
So let's have a look at that now, please.
Mr. Warburton, there's a Mr. the Frog here to see you.
What, the Mr. the Frog?
Mr. Warburton,
Is it true you're bringing out a giant crumpet?
Yes, but...
Well, sir, you have given me a fantastic idea for a Muppet extravaganza. Picture this, Johnny. It's the Giant Crumpet Show! It's time to grab the toaster. It's time to take a bite. It's time for Giant Crumpets on the Crumpet Show tonight. They're thick and super fluffy. Ooh, I know what that feels like. It's time for Giant Crumpets.
They're bigger than my grandma. They taste so heavenly.
I don't know why they're called giant. They look like small to me.
And how about my self-toasting crumpet?
We'll eat them for our breakfast.
We'll eat them as a treat. We'll eat them with a cup of watching Coronation Street.
Yeah! What do you call a dog made out of bread? A crumpet! Ah! And now our very special guest, Mr. Giant Crumpet himself, Jonathan Warburton! Oh no, where's Mr. Warburton?
So, is it true you're the world's biggest supplier of crumpets?
It's time to hit the Arndale
To get some bigger plates.
It's time to get them toasted.
Most sensational, inspirational, giantational, crumpetational. This is called the Giant Crumpet Show.
Mad for it! So what do you say, Johnny?
That wasn't half bad.
You're right. It was all bad.
I prefer the other one.
Yeah, where is Stallone anyway?
Oh.
Merry crumpets, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jonathan Warburton.
Thank you.